Welcome, everyone. Welcome to day 41 of the 75 Days of Partition live podcast series that the 1947 Partition Archive has been doing to mark this landmark year. I'm Sonam Kalra. I'm a musician with my own body of work in music delving into the partition, and I am here on behalf of the 1947 Partition Archive to welcome a very special guest on this series, Raj Usworth. Raj Usworth has extensive experience of governance in a range of settings and structures, including maintained schools, single academies, and multi-academy trusts. She particularly enjoys the challenge of working with leaders in schools in difficult circumstances, which is why she joined a new board during the COVID-19 pandemic and was elected chair at the first meeting. She's also a specialist advisor to the Heads Roundtable group of HTs and CEOs. Her professional background in HR, change management, and business is very often appreciated by boards. Raj is a people person who believes that every child has a right to good education and that we must look after our staff and build good relationships with parents and communities. Raj is also the chair of the Partition Education Group, which is the education arm of South Asian Heritage. Its key aim is to ensure this crucial part of our shared colonial history is taught in our schools. Thank you so much, Raj, for being here for this chat. We're really very happy to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I wasn't quite expecting quite an introduction, but thank you very much for that.
No, it's really lovely to have you here. But, just so that everyone also understands where you're coming from and all this great work that you do, I wanted to know, how did you become interested in the partition? Do you have a background where your family perhaps was affected by it in any way, or some of the members of your family came from the other side? What is it that drew you specifically to partition?
Well, like most families, my family came to the UK in the 60s. So I came here as a 7-year-old. And actually, I had not even heard of partition. It wasn't covered during my schooling years. And I now have 3 children. The youngest is 22, and it wasn't covered during their schooling years either. So my initial introduction to partition was about 5 years ago, 2018 to be precise. And somebody tweeted about this group that was meeting at the House of Commons, and they were talking about the partition of India, and I thought, I know nothing about that. So I got involved. I went to the inaugural meeting, and I was completely gobsmacked, because this is a part of what I would call our shared history that I knew absolutely nothing about. There were people, it was a big gathering. There were people from different creeds, different colors, different religion, older people, younger people. And crucially for me, there were actually survivors of partition who were able to relate a little bit about their experience of that time. So that's really how I kind of got involved in it. And that group on that day was articulating a couple of particular aims. One was to get the British government to actually acknowledge partition, the importance of partition in our shared history, and commemoration of it. That was the other thing. And there were several aims, but the more important of those aims for me personally was actually going to be about teaching children, making sure that it was going to be included in our curriculum. Now, so that's how I got involved. In terms of my own personal family history, interestingly, only in the last couple of years have I spoken to my own father. My father is now 93, and I asked him about it. Why have you never mentioned? Because we are from Punjab, and we were impacted by it. And he said to me, you never asked me. And that really made me think. And I was thinking, well, how could I ask if I didn't know about it?
Right.
So, but actually it's been brilliant, because he has spoken about his experience of it. Now, my family wasn't affected in the same way as a lot of other families, because we actually we were in the Pakistani side, but we moved to the Indian side the year before, 1946 we moved. So,
Okay.
but my father is able to tell me all kinds of horror stories. But equally, what I find quite reassuring is that in terms of everyday life, he tells me that, people from different religion, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, all existed side by side. They respected each other's tradition, their religion, but they did actually exist side by side. So that's really how I first got involved in it. I have to say, I'm quite ashamed that I know nothing about it, or I knew nothing about it. So since then, I have been educating myself.
I think, what you just said. I mean, I've been reading a lot of the poetry because I do a performance piece on partition with wonderful testimonials from the Partition Archive. But one of the things that, just sort of resonates is the fact that you said that everybody used to live together. And there's a few lines by Ali Sardar Jafri, one of the poets who wrote at the time, where he says that this was the same land, and I'll say it in Hindi, Urdu, where he says, जहाँ सारे धर्म के लोग ईश्वर को रब के नाम से ही जानते थे, where everybody referred to God as Rab, because it was the Punjab. It wasn't different names, and they did. And many of the people you'll speak to, whether it's historian Kuldeep Nair and writer, who said that we live together in perfect harmony. But also what you just said about your father saying that you never asked me about it, I think that perhaps, I mean, it makes me wonder if that was what struck a chord with you, that if they do not know, then how can they ask? And was that the primary reason for you to want to have this education group, for them to know so that then they can ask and spark conversation and discussion?
I think, yes, there is partly that, but also I think that, I don't know how you feel, but certainly in the UK, and I know the same is true in America, because I know there will be audience from the States here, there is a lot of division at the moment. There's a lot of lack of respect for each other's cultures and understanding of each other's cultures. And I think a lot of that has to stem from the fact that we do not teach British colonial history, especially not in England. I mean, yes, there are some schools that cover it, but as a general rule, it is not something that's covered. So the reason why we have stayed out of the GCSEs, A-level exam years, external exam years, is because we think it's so important. It needs to be covered outside of that and with children who are young. And for all children, it is so important that they have a sense of belonging, of their identity, that they understand how their families have come to be, how come they were born in England or America or Australia or wherever they're born, because partition was one of the key events. It was one of the biggest refugee crises in history. And if you look now, we have not learned the lessons from partition, have we? Because we are still seeing Afghanistan, we're seeing the Ukraine, we're seeing Syria, and want to leave anybody out accidentally, because these things are still happening today. And it really is important that children grow up with empathy for refugees who find themselves through no fault of their own. It wasn't the fault of the Hindus or the Sikhs or the Muslims at that time. This was a decision that was taken, and it was out of their hands. So yes, it's much more about society as a whole. And respect for each other and understanding each other. And only through that can we actually improve the future for children.
No, I think it's really true what you said about the refugee crisis, because I think people tend to overlook the fact that no one wants to be a refugee. No one wants not to belong. Everyone needs anchoring in their lives. And we were talking, to a doctor a couple of days ago about the effects of the PTSD of this becoming a refugee, how it continues for generations. But I think that, I mean, your idea of founding this Partition Education Group, as you just said, seems to be to create a world of children with empathy, with understanding, and so that perhaps the same mistakes will not be followed. But you said you're keeping it out of the A-level schools, but it is in schools. It is in the curriculum of schools at a more primary level. Is that correct?
No, what I meant, what I was trying to say was that we have external examinations at key stages. At 16, we do GCSEs in England, GCSEs.
Right.
Now, children pick which GCSEs they want to do. If a
Right.
child picks history, there is no guarantee that in that history curriculum there will be partition will be covered.
Right.
Same with A levels at 18. There is no guarantee that this will actually be covered. So what we're
Right.
doing is we're working for children year 3, 4, 5, which is 8, 9, 10, that sort of age group, and in secondary, 12, 13-year-olds, because partition is a topic that doesn't just lend itself to being taught through history. It's actually more than that. It's what we call extracurricular. And certainly in England, we do have the autonomy in our school to teach these sort of topic as part of a broad and balanced curriculum. So what we're doing is we're looking at it from, if you think of partition, for example, you can't really teach a topic like that without going back into the context. You know, why were the Brits in India? And actually all of the events that led up to partition. And then in terms of talking about the geography, you know, what did India look like before partition, after partition? There could be a lesson on the key people, Mountbatten, Nehru, Gandhi, all the key people involved. And actually, who decided how this division was going to take place? I understand actually that it was decided over one lunch period. And then you think about, they brought it forward by a year and did it within a matter of months. So the whole topic lends itself to all of that. And going back to what you were saying about refugees, I think it's equally important that we bring all of this to date, because it explains the migration of people from India across the globe. So to America, you know, to England, to Australia, to all over the world, really. And in doing so, it actually also makes us think about the impact on the children who are then subsequently born in those countries. Why is it that they don't understand why this big event actually happened? And the trauma, you mentioned the trauma earlier associated with it. So take that up to the Ukraine situation today. That's happening today. We're 75 years on and we still have intergenerational trauma. So these people are going to go through this in years to come. And we need to start learning lessons from the past, really.
Yeah. No, absolutely. How many schools have sort of adopted it? How does it work? Do they adopt the curriculum in this part? How do you go about, how do the children come to you? Do they have to find you? Do you find them in schools? How does it work?
Okay, so what we've done, and I'll tell you what, this has been a massive labor of love. It has been so difficult because we've had the pandemic. 2 years effectively where we've not been able to meet face to face, and firstly there are 4 of us in the core group. We are very much part of as in partnership with South Asian Heritage Month as well, and some of the founders are involved in that. But in terms of Partition Education Group itself, what I was keen to do, and this is so important to me, is that we make sure that the materials for schools that we intend to share with schools, written by teachers. They are the experts. They're the experts. So and also it was important for me to make sure that we included Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, Indian, Pakistani, Bengali, you know, because the whole topic of partition and everything that's going on in that region at the moment also means that we have to be so careful to be inclusive.
Yes.
And what we've done, and the pandemic has made it incredibly difficult, really difficult. So we've got groups of teachers working on lesson plans, so primary and secondary. And what we've done is we've had the website, we produced that ourselves. One of our volunteers have put that together. We started adding resources to it. We've got people blogging for us, so we've got the word out there in the last 18 months or so. Schools have started to approach us, and I've had CEOs from Multi Academy Trust get in touch, and they've sort of said, well, you know what, I'm really ashamed to say that although I'm an educator and I have been teaching for 20, 30 years, I really know nothing about it. And then in this time also, we have seen a number of books come out on partition. There's Torn Apart from Swapna Haddo, which is aimed at children. I've just finished reading a brilliant book called Daughters of Partition, Fozia Raja. So we've just been sharing the resources. So to answer your question, this isn't a big kind of ta-da, we've prepared all this, it's all out there. We're still working on it. And we are responding to a huge number of inquiries, not just from England. We've had inquiries from Australia, from America. We've had people make contact from India as well. They are, and actually, one thing I never expected, that was the new Marvel film. I haven't actually watched it, but that has started generating discussion as well. So it's really very much a ground up movement, if you like. It's not a top down dictatorial. And then a couple of weeks ago, we spoke at Bradford Literary Festival, and they had a whole day devoted to partition. So they had 2 classes of children, young people there, and they were very much from diverse background. There were Muslims there, there were Sikhs there, and the children were asking us questions. So we told them a little bit about it, and they've gone back to their schools and they're saying, hang on a minute, why are you not teaching us about this? This is really important. This is helping me to understand who I am.
I am, absolutely. Identity. That is such a crucial thing for children, and again, to be rooted, which is what we were talking about. The strongest children come out of strong roots, but also it's very, very interesting that young children, despite, like you perhaps at the time when you asked your father about this, not knowing about partition, despite that, it's like we have this in our DNA to want to know. And I think it's time that these questions are answered. But I want to also ask you how you feel about the importance of oral histories in these teachings for these children. Because, narratives of school books and even teachers will be slightly, say, for lack of a better word, they'll be more academic, they'll be a little more cold. They will tell you that there was a line, stroke of midnight, blah, blah, blah. But it won't truly, I feel, this is again my personal opinion, I feel like a child or for anyone to truly understand and gain empathy, they have to hear the stories of people who lived through it. So what do you feel about the import of these oral histories for educating children?
I think it is absolutely crucial. And the thing we have to be careful about is that we don't want to be replicating work other people have already done. So I have always been very, very keen to ensure we have partnership with organizations that have similar aims to us. And therefore, I know that Partition 1947 already has a lot of oral history. There are museums with all of this as well. Crucially, though, we are currently involved in a project for which we had funding with another organization based in Huddersfield here in England. And we've actually appointed a project coordinator, and what she is doing is she is going to interview young people and older people together and hopefully find some partition survivors, young people who may or may not already know about partition, and actually record those dialogues. And that's happening in the next 2 weeks, actually. So we're currently recruiting these young people. So they will be 17, 18-year-olds. And then elderly people from within the communities who either have memories of it from what they were told by their parents, or perhaps they themselves were around at the time. But that's what actually we're working on that as well. That will form part of what we are able to share with schools. Almost like you could almost sort of play something like that to children and say, well, what do you think? What do you think about that? How would that make you feel? If you were in that position, how would that make you feel? And in fact, one of our teachers, I haven't even mentioned our teachers, have been very, very, very fortunate. They're all people I met through Twitter.
Wow. Okay.
And because of lockdown, we were not able to meet face to face. And they are completely committed, passionate professionals. And one of them actually had recorded the most wonderful lesson, and she's talking as a child through what it feels like. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get children to put themselves, especially the younger children, put themselves in the shoes of a young child who suddenly woken up in the middle of the night and told, okay, come on, we got to go. No, you can't go and say goodbye to your friends. No, you can't do anything. No, you can't take all your toys with you. We've just got to get going. And it's that whole, go back to what we were saying earlier about the empathy, about understanding how there are still people in this world today who are made to feel like that. And as a child, and we know in times of war, it's always women, children, elderly, people who end up suffering the most. And that we just need to develop that sense of understanding about that.
And I think it must be especially hard for you also because you're dealing with such a sensitive topic, but you're also dealing with violence and talking to children about the violence, about the kind of barbaric acts that occurred with women and children, or, friends, people you woke up the next morning, I mean, your friend killed you. But I'm interested in knowing what has been the response of the children, and is there any one instance that perhaps you can recall where you really felt like, one of those moments where you all feel like it's worth it and we're doing the right thing because it shifted a mindset or changed a perspective, or a child said something that was so moving and meaningful?
Yeah, well, okay, firstly, this issue about violence, I think we do not give children and young people enough credit for being resilient. They are surrounded by violence. In America, gun violence, left, right, and center. We hear about it on the news here. They see a lot of this, and our job as adults is to try and help them get some understanding behind that, try and understand what's going on. In terms of what you were saying, the group of children I talked about earlier that we met with, it was really interesting because some of the ones that really asked the most questions were children from what we call white British background. Mm-hmm. They were absolutely really fascinated, and I think this is not just to teach South Asian children. There are plenty of South Asian families, grown-ups and children, who don't know about partition, but it's equally important. But when I say all children, I mean black, white, whatever, all children. Right. And for me, watching this child was thinking, I could see that he was thinking, oh, hang on a minute, this happened in 1947, and well, how did they find out about it? So we said, well, there was no mobile phone, there was no internet, so they would have just found out word of mouth, and it happened so quickly, and we could see his little brain ticking over, and then he was saying, wow, and then he said, and then they just had to leave everything behind, and they just had to go, and they had to go to a strange country because to them it was a strange country. And then he brought it back into talking about the Ukraine. He said, well, we have children in our school who have come from the Ukraine now, so they must be feeling the same. So for me, I think, yeah, and he promised he was going to go back and talk to his head teacher and say, please can we learn more about this? And also they were going to be more understanding of children that join their school maybe partway through the year, that sort of thing. So yes, I think it's really, really important. That's why I think it's important that we start with primary children. Absolutely. And then we move on to and build onto it. So this is a long-term project. So the idea is to embed it slowly into the curriculum, build on it every year, maybe start with an assembly first, and then build on it with some lessons. And we are, as a group, we're happy to support people. We've even had organizations contact us and say, oh, our staff would like to learn about partition. Can one of you come and talk to us about it? So there is a lot of interest out there from adults as well as from schools. Obviously, our focus is schools, but we do work closely with South Asian Heritage Month, and of course South Asia, 8 countries, so they're focusing on a lot more, the cultural, the food, the music, poetry, literature, everything. But I genuinely do believe that education really is the solution to it all. So the children will go back and tell their parents about it.
Absolutely, and change mindsets and perspectives. So I think that's really huge, and it's so commendable that you're doing this. What is the next step that you're planning? Any new ideas that are being discussed to enhance or achieve future goals that you have with this group?
So I think that if you know education, you can produce lessons, you can produce resources, they can be the best in the world. But at the end of the day, if the teachers who are going to deliver those lessons or teach that particular topic are not confident that they have the knowledge and understanding, they're just not confident teaching it, you're not going to get anywhere. So we're already working in another project with Loughborough University, and that is teacher training on the topic of partition. So we will be running some of those and hopefully get involved with that. Longer term, it is literally about doing more of what we do, raising awareness, supporting other groups, supporting, the inquiries that we have had because of the 75th anniversary have been phenomenal. And, as I say, we're volunteers. I'm literally rushed off my feet responding to all of these inquiries at the moment. Longer term, I think there is a group that is already talking about a museum of migration.
Oh, fantastic.
Maybe part of that could be something on partition. Seriously, long term, it would be fantastic if we could have a small museum on partition or partition itself in England, in the UK, because we're not without critics. There are people out there who don't want this taught, and I don't, tough. It's something that we're all very committed to, passionate about, and whether they like it or not, we have to accept there are people who don't share our view, and that's fine too. So what we intend to do is carry on doing more of the same. We know it is the right thing to do.
Absolutely.
And I know everybody that has been involved, and we, as I say, we're all from all different creeds, all different backgrounds, with a common aim. And we'll carry on doing with the work we're doing.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. And I think that not only are you starting from the root, which is children, but you're starting them off at a really young age to build these qualities of empathy, humanity. Just asking them, I think that lesson where your teacher sounds like a child herself makes the children put themselves in the other person's shoes and understand what it's like, and sparks these questions. And I think then these are not taught things anymore. These are things that conclusions that children come to themselves, and therefore they will feel them deeper and possibly carry that emotion for a longer time. But thank you so much. It sounds absolutely incredible, and I just wish you, I know that the 1947 Partition Archive wishes you the very best in this very brave endeavor, as you said, tough, as you respond to your critics, tough. I think that's who you...
It is tough. But, I need to finish off. There's something I do want to say, and that is that people say, well, why should be teaching this? Why are you here? Why should we accept people here? Go back where you came from. That sort of nonsense. And the classic response to that is two things. Firstly, we're here because you were there.
Right.
And secondly, actually, and this is Satnam Sanghera said this in Empire Land, his book, Britain is multicultural because empire was multicultural. So those two things are really, really important. I consider myself to be British. My children were born here. There's absolutely no way, India is motherland, but there's no way any of us are going anywhere. And I do think that, we have a duty also to try and share and talk and be more respectful and just aim for a better society. Less divided, more unity.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. And as you said, studying about partition isn't about studying about India. It's studying about things that are larger than what happened to undivided India at the time, before it was divided. It's about the refugee crisis. It's about empathy, as you said. It's the hope for a better world. And thank you for the work that you do. It's commendable. Thank you so much, Raj. It's really been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
No, thank you. And for those of you who enjoyed this conversation, please join us tomorrow for day 42 of 75 Days of Partition, which, just to remind you, is a daily micro-podcast series being aired for 75 days between June 3rd, 2022 and August 17, 2022, except on Sundays, to mark the 75th anniversary of partition in 2022. The series entails live conversation bursts with historians, filmmakers, authors, art makers, incredible practitioners working on uncovering and understanding the history of partition. Our goal is to introduce new findings to you to spark your curiosity, explore new perspectives, and perhaps bend your mind and change perspectives through short daily micro discussions. Thank you so much for joining us. See you tomorrow.